We've spoken to a former Bristol mayor, we've had conversations with various musicians, and today we're talking sport. I'm your host, James Ewen. Your take, your path, your perspective. For today's guest, there is no better spectacle than an English summer. The sound of ball on willow, teams dressed all in white, and a game of chess between two sides. Our guest was a fast bowler who played cricket for Leicestershire and played 3 test matches and 3 one-day internationals for England. He traded his cricket whites for a career as a broadcaster. He shared the commentary box with the likes of Brian Johnston, Henry Blowfield, and Jeff Boycott. He's played with and against cricket's finest and witnessed some of sport's greatest moments, from Brian Lara's 400 not out, England's 2005 Ashes win, Shane Warne's delivery to Mike Gattin, and Ben Stokes' match-winning innings. He's one of the great minds of cricket, and I'll simply introduce him under his nickname, if he doesn't mind. Aggers, a warm welcome.
Thank you. It's very nice to be with you.
It's a great honour to have you. Thank you for taking...
I don't know great minds of cricket. I'm not sure I'm a great mind of cricket. I'm a lover of cricket, and I want cricket to be fun and to be enjoyed by everybody, people who haven't come across the game before. So definitely a cricket lover. I think others have got greater cricket minds than I have.
You're in hands with someone else who's an avid cricket fan, which I'll discuss a little bit in the interview, but I brought a little mascot today, which is obviously a real cricket ball. I won't be delivering you any fierce deliveries today, but to start with, what we wanted to do is we'll go back in time to talk about your upbringing, how you first encountered the beautiful game, which obviously we both share and both love. But firstly, we start in the current period. Can you tell us what you're currently doing? Are you writing for newspapers, columns, and?
Well, it's been a really strange time for everybody, hasn't it? And that includes cricket commentators. So I've spent the winter trying to do what we can do. Obviously, we haven't been able to go away. It's been the first winter I've had at home since 1990. So that's all been a bit strange as well. My wife's just about put up with me, I think. But actually, in some ways, I've really enjoyed just the experience of being at home. You know, we have such an itinerant and rather selfish life in which you just pack up and go away for months. And it's one of the downsides of the job in many ways. You know, you miss many Christmases, kids' birthdays, all that sort of thing. So it is quite demanding. And therefore, just to have all this time at home has been lovely, actually. Now, the difficulty has been trying to cover cricket from other parts of the world on their time zone. So for Sri Lanka and India, obviously it meant getting up at, 3:30, I suppose, lighting the fire, getting warm, and working off the television, which is a new experience. I'd never done that before. We could do it because BBC had the rights to do it for Sri Lanka. The other one was just kind of reports. And it was, you mentioned chess in your introduction, and it was necessary. There was no other option, but covering cricket off the telly really is like watching a game of chess with only half a chessboard. You don't really see what's going on. It's very difficult to read a game off the telly, and it's an interesting experience because a lot of the people who get in touch with me, should we say, from a more negative perspective, are those who are obviously watching off the telly because they're not where I am watching the game, and so I've had a bit more sympathy perhaps with their view because they're not seeing the whole game. If you're there watching a game, and I'm very lucky to do so, but it's just different. You see things happening. I remember saying to Alex Stewart when he was still playing, and he had a bit of a dart at me about something. I said, Alec, you wait till you come in the commentary box. You will see things 10 minutes before they do out in the middle, because you're just sitting there watching an entire game. You're not biased, you're not in a dressing room, you haven't got your blinkers on, just watching a game of cricket. And you'll be shouting at the captain to make a bowling change 10 minutes before he does. He's going, oh, no, he won't. But anyway, a few years later, he's in the commentary box, the captain said, you're absolutely right. Because you're just sitting there and you're watching a game and you're not tied to any particular team or person. You're just sitting there doing hopefully a fair and unbiased job of reporting on what's going on. So that was a bit odd doing it off the telly, but yeah, we got through it. And I just hope that we can move on. I've got both my jabs, so because I'm ancient. So hopefully that will mean we can get going this summer and get back to doing cricket how it should be done, with crowds and noise and excitement and the things that we've taken for granted for so long. 30 years I've been out there at the start of every test match with the captains at the toss, and you've got the full house around you, the noise and everything, excitement brewing, and yeah, you do take it for granted, because it's kind of what you do. But last summer, when there was none of that, and there was a silence and no atmosphere, and interviewing players from 2 meters away and so on, that was it had to be done. But I can't wait to get back to doing things normally again.
Soon we've got the English Test summer season. Obviously, England playing 2 Test series. What do you think the odds are on both England wins in those 2 series?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're both very good sides, aren't they? They're numbers 1 and 2 in the world. So, and they're playing their own Test match, India and New Zealand, in the first World Test Championship final. So, if you can't get any better than that, New Zealand are a very good and often underrated team, and they play very well in our conditions. So they'll be a challenge. And with the IPL situation, funny enough, I phoned up Chris Wokes and Johnny Bairstow yesterday to see how they're getting on in their isolation. It's clearly pretty tough. They've been there, as I'm talking to you, it's their 8th day. And they've got tests today, which if they happen to fail, they have to do another 10. I mean, it's a pretty tricky thing. So I think they've both written out any thoughts, certainly Chris, of playing against New Zealand. So quite how their quarantine will work and isolations that we don't really know yet. And obviously India are the same. I mean, goodness knows what'll happen with their team, but they've got a lot of quarantining to do before they get here. So there's going to be fitness doubts, all the COVID still going to be lurking around. If there is an outbreak, if a player gets it, we still haven't experienced that yet in Test cricket, thank goodness. But if you just take it as 2 normal Test series and try and abandon the rest of it, they'll be really good series. India here is a different proposition to India in India as it was in the winter, obviously, and you'd have to back England's chances, or you certainly would have done in the old days. But now India's seam attack is as good as anybody's. You wouldn't have found anyone saying that 10 years ago, but they're a fantastic all-round unit now. So that series, 5 tests as well, which is great. It's going to be, they'll both be really good series, and of course looming in the background all the way through it, and it's just like a subtext is the Ashes. So how England will go for that, how they're going to rotate their players for that, how they're going to try and get everyone fit for that. That's all going to be a bit of a subplot. And there'll be people saying, you shouldn't be talking about the Ashes because you're playing India and so on. Well, I'm afraid you do. It's just what makes English and Australian cricket tick. The Ashes is very important. And so it will be governing everyone's thoughts, including the coach and the players, throughout this summer. And there's no getting away from that.
I was going to obviously come on to the Ashes because it is the penultimate spectacle between England and Australia. Obviously, great history throughout, but we've not got a particularly good record on their soil, have we? If you take the last 20 to 30 years, I think it was 1986 when Gower won over there, and we won back in, was it 2007? We did very well out there, winning 4-1, I think it was. You'll correct me. Do you think we can claim the Ashes back on this occasion, or is it still going to be a massive?
Well, we'll see. I mean, it was
challenge.
2010-11. Actually, it's a memory that I'll never. No, well, I'll never lose it, because it's the only time I've seen England win away in 30 odd years of doing this job. So that was it was unforgettable. And that day in Melbourne, funnily enough, my wife was there. I'd managed to get her into the commentary box. I'm not quite sure how, but sort of spirited her in, because I knew what was going to happen that day. And as we won and won the Ashes, I got my stuff to go out and broadcast from the pitch, like I always do, amongst the players and so on. A massive crowd, beautiful day. And as I ran out of the commentary box, I saw on the table there was a spare pass, a ground pass. So I put it around Emma's neck and said, "Come on." And I took her out. So she was out with me for this. And it was a kind of way of saying thanks to her, really, because I couldn't do this job without her. You probably see behind me, it was our silver wedding anniversary of the day. So That's how long we've been married, and so it was a kind of a thank you, but also not that she needed it, but sort of an illustration and an explanation of why I do the job, because so it is a selfish job, and we are away a lot, and Emma and all the other wives involved, players, commentators, so on, have got a lot to do to kind of look after home, and especially those with young kids, which thankfully we don't have anymore, but we did have that. And so that moment was really special, and I'll never ever forget that. And I've got photographs of her out there, the England players doing the sprinkler and all that sort of nonsense, and I'll never forget it, because it was the opportunity, as I said, to say thanks to her. So can we do it this year? I'd love to. I don't really know, as I speak to you, what it's going to be like. I went up to see Mark Wood the other day way up in Morpeth. A little boy, prospect of bubbles all summer and bubbles all winter, and whether or not families can go out and do it and join the Ashes. I don't know if that'll happen. So it'll make it different, whether it be crowds and all that. We just don't know, do we? So much uncertainty, but they are again a very fine side, and especially there. But I would love to see England win the Ashes again in Australia before I finish.
We've spoken a bit about the modern cricket game. You've touched about traveling around the world and your lifestyle as a cricket commentator and your marriage. We're going to go back before all of that, before you were married, before you had children, before the commentary career. We're going to go back to your early life to start with. And I just wanted you just to share your early memories of growing up with your parents, Philip and Margaret, and growing up with your brother, Christopher, and you had a sister, Felicity. So what was family life like back in those days?
Chris and I were at boarding school, so it was home was important, therefore. So you really piled your time into being at home. We were both away from the age of 8, which is, I'm not sure I could have done that to my kids, and my parents only did it because they felt it was the right thing to do at the time, But we went away at 8 years old, so I boarded for 10 years. So being at home was pretty special, really. But I just, my dad was a farmer, so I've always associated cricket, really, and he was a keen cricketer, a sort of a club cricketer, amateur, he loved the game, and I just got his memories on the farm of the corn coming in, if you like, and the sort of the smell of the corn, it being very warm. And he would always take the radio with him, Test Match Special. And so from silo to off, he'd go with the radio, listening and chuckling away to Brian Johnston and John Arlott and Fred and Trevor and people who I'd be working with. I mean, God knows, at the age of 10 or 12, whatever I was, the thought of working with these people was just kind of nonsense, really. We had a little duck pond, and I remember sitting there and listening to TMS one time, the little orange transistor radio. I remember it very clearly. That's probably, I don't know, 12 or 13, I suppose. And again, listening to people who I'd be working with. So that was a bit bizarre, really. But mainly, I mean, I just loved watching cricket on the telly. I would just seal myself away for a test match. All 5 days, close the curtains and just sit and watch a test, and then go out and play and sort of copy your heroes, if you like, with Dad and Chris in the garden later, But again, people who I was watching, I mean, Ray Illingworth as captain of England, the test matches that I was watching, and he was my first county captain.
Oh, wow.
Tony Gregg, who I remember, became a really good family friend. I mean, Jeff Boycott, you mentioned Jeffrey, all these people, John Edrich, all these people, Alan Knott, Derek Underwood, people, John Snow became my travel agent. It's really weird how life sort of catches up on itself, really. I was only a kid, a real youngster watching these people, and then it wasn't that long after that I was actually in their company. In Ray's case, 4 or 5 years later, he was my captain against Lancashire in my first match. It's amazing how these things catch up. It really is. And heroes, Dennis Lilly, Ian Chappell, people who I wanted to hate, Jeff Thompson, Rod Marsh, I love them. They're really good friends of mine, and it's crazy, but it's just the way the life has panned out.
It's a beautiful story, really, that you were there listening to radio. You had this love of cricket and this love of broadcast radio, And then what you're listening to, all of a sudden, years later, not only did you become a professional cricketer, but you became a very successful broadcaster. But I want to talk about your love of radio, because I share with you a love of radio. I used to work in radio many years ago. What is it about radio for you that's, for you, it's kind of the better medium than television? What do you prefer about radio than TV?
Oh, I think everything. I mean, I've done television, obviously, presentation and so on. But I think, when you know for a start whether you're a radio person or a TV person, because there's such different disciplines, and there are people who try and do both, but you can tell they're better at one or the other. The only person who I've come across who was equally skilled at both and comfortable at both was Tony Cozier, the great West Indian commentator, who could just move seamlessly between boxes, and he was just so clever at doing that. But most people have one or the other. But radio is warm. It's contact. It's communication. You can almost reach out and touch people who are listening to you, and that's what I love about radio. In that, people listen to us for a long time, every day, sort of 8 hours a day or through the night. And that's when it's sort of almost particularly intimate, really, because you know that many of your people, most of your audience, are lying in bed, probably with headphones on, and they're half asleep. And they're sort of listening to you, in Australia or New Zealand, or where you happen to be at that time. And you're really sort of getting into people's heads, and you can just tease them a bit. I try and be a bit more gentle during the night, because people don't want shouting and yelling and screaming. They want a more gentle experience, I think, than what you generally give them during the day. But it is that means of being able to really communicate, whereas TV is just a box in the corner of your room that you watch, and clearly, it does take you into the heart of the action. And TV commentators do a brilliant job these days, because they do have to talk more than Richie and Jim Laker and Peter West and Dennis Compton, people I was listening to, because there's adverts these days, and also there's the expectation that people will talk more. So it is very difficult to commentate on the television and not just say the obvious about what you can see on the screen. And that's a skill of doing what they do. My skill, if that's what you can call it, is that I take people and I'm illustrating and commentating, and I'm bringing to life something that people can't see, either because they're blind in many cases. We have a lot of blind listeners, and again, a really important aspect of what I do is actually bringing the game to life for them. And that's why try and be quite precise about where the ball goes, the little details. I remember once talking about a straight drive and it had gone for four, it was a lovely stroke, and I had a letter or an email from a blind listener the next day saying, hang on a minute, it was very nice, Jonathan, he said, but you didn't quite tell us where the ball had gone. It's all well say it's a straight drive, but if it was straight, it would hit the stumps. So did it go the offside of straight or the onside of straight? And you think, okay, fair enough, absolutely right. So it's things like that you just, detail do still really try and get, because you're trying to make it as full a picture as you possibly can. So whereas Henry Blofeld, when he was doing it, would be off wildly describing pigeons and buses and everything else. Yeah, it was all a bit manic, but it brought the whole place, it gave it another dimension, and if you notice with Henry's commentary, however many buses or women in red dresses or he's talking about, actually when the bowler's running into bowl, he's talking about that, because every ball for Henry was an event. And that's the most important thing, that if you go rambling off too much and you lose the thread, then that's very frustrating. The thread that goes through the commentary is the cricket. And as a commentator, I get frustrated if I'm with someone who just talks all the time. And it doesn't allow you that build up, the bowler running in and bowling, because that is what everyone who's listening is, that's in their mind. Okay, the bowler's running in now, and the batsman's playing the shot. Even if it's just, he plays no shot and it's outside the off stump, and there it goes through to the keeper. You're still, that is the rhythm. That's the rhythm of the commentary, and the rest of it is purely an add-on.
Sometimes, like you say, silence can mean more than words, can't it? Depending on the pulls in and so on. For some of us that watch the live cricket, we'll be there watching the live televised version from whoever broadcaster, but we'll be listening to the commentary on the radio, because for us it's more interesting, it's more lively, and we prefer the personalities or whatever. But that aside, I kind of wanted to move on. You've spoken about your love of radio, listening to cricket on the radio with your dad. But can you recall the first live cricket game you went to and the players you saw play?
Yeah, it was the 1971 Gillette Cup final at Lord's. My dad took me for my birthday present. So I would have been, 11? And I remember we sat in the grandstand, the old grandstand, and it was Lancashire against Kent. And Lancashire was my team anyway, because I was born in Cheshire, and my dad was from there. So they were my heroes anyway. But I sat there in the grandstand, 11 years old with dad, and watched, Peter Lever was the one who really struck me. Peter Lever was a fast bowler for Lancashire. He played for England too. And he ran a very long way. He ran, I was watching him bowling from the nursery end, so sort of coming sideways, and the ball was going down. I'd never seen a ball go so fast. And Peter was a very good-looking, strapping, athletic fellow. And I said to my dad, that's who I want to be. I want to be Peter Lever. And so from that moment on, I was Peter Lever, and I tried to copy his action. I just adored him. He was all over my bedroom wall, and I just, he was my absolute sporting hero. And again, like I was talking earlier, the lovely thing is it goes round in full circle, and Peter's now a very good friend of mine. He's getting on a bit. He's retired down to Cornwall. I went and spoke at a club dinner for him down there. He's just the nicest man. I mean, I was so lucky to have picked him as my hero, and we regularly talk, and it's just great. I played at a Taverners game years ago now. I think Brian Close might have been captain. We played at Scarborough anyway. Peter was playing, and this is before I'd really met him, and I was very shy, and I sort of happened to mention it to somebody that Peter was my hero. And so the captain that Peter and I opened the bowling together. So Lever and Agnew were there on a scorecard somewhere having opened. So that's nice. And it's that day I'll always remember. It was a great game of cricket too. Lancashire won. And I could just about list off that whole and again, we're going to go back on a slightly old ground, but that was 1971. They're my heroes. David Lloyd was captain, of course, my old friend Bumble. So 7 years later, I'm making my debut for Leicestershire at the age of 18, straight out of school, against Lancashire. I'm playing, my debut was against my heroes.
Oh, wow.
David was playing. I got David out in my first over. He still talks about it. So, that side, there were some changes, obviously. It's the one that I saw at age 11. But David was there and others. And so that, my first match for Leicestershire was weird because I had literally come out of school and there was injuries at Leicestershire. And I didn't really know anybody. I hadn't met Ray before, Illingworth. David Gower, of course, was playing and things like that. So I was raw, as you like. I mean, straight out of school, plastic boots. But playing against people who, it was weird. Running and bowl, first ball in first class cricket, David Lloyd was.
Oh wow!
It was mad. It was mad. It was the biggest no ball I've ever bowled. I think I was so stressed. I got him out fourth ball. I clean bowled him, and that was kind of the start of it all, really.
Yeah, obviously it's a huge breakthrough in your cricketing career, signing with Leicestershire, the contract awarded in 1978. And I wanted to talk about you winning the Whitbread Brewery Award, and as a result of that, you spent the winter in Australia, being coached and mentored by a tremendous fast bowler in Frank Tyson. That must have been a great pre-education as a fast bowler.
Well, it was. And I mean, I rather wasted it because I mentioned that school and so on, and having been at boarding school for 10 years and then straight to Leicestershire and playing in that match against Lancashire. And I played a couple of others and the season ended. And then, it all happened so quickly. So that winter, I was then sent to Australia, which in 1978, quite a big journey, frankly. I was 18, I'd just left school, been at boarding school for 10 years. And I just wanted, it was my first bit of freedom, to be fair. So I wish it had been more closely monitored. I mean, I was told that I'll be met at Melbourne Airport by someone called Frank. And I had no idea it was going to be Frank Tyson. I'm not sure I really recognised him when he picked me up anyway. So there was a bloke called Frank who was bald. I went to stay at his house. I lived with him for a couple of months. And he was great. Of course, I became aware of who Frank Tyson was. He was very kind, very gentle. and I played over there, and I just wish it had been the sort of opportunity that the young cricketers today get, which would have been much more monitored. There had been proper gym sessions, there had been really proper, structured monitoring of what I was doing. Was in fact what I was doing, having a good time, rocking up on Saturdays and playing grade cricket, which again was big. It was quite a big step up. They're pretty ferocious Australian grade cricket, for an 18-year-old Englishman who just come out of school.
I can imagine.
It was pretty tough. And then in the weeks, Frank would send me off with an old chap called Barry Plant, who had a sort of a white van, and off we'd go packed up with cricket kit, and we'd go off and literally go for a week. The country's obviously all around Victoria, which is what Frank was in charge of, coaching in schools in and around Victoria. And Barry would look after me, and out we'd go to the Australian bars and stuff, and we'd come clattering back and then go and play on the Saturday. So it was a great trip, an amazing holiday, really. But from a cricketing perspective, I could have made much more of it, no doubt about that. And I think it'd been a couple of years later, clearly I would have done.
Years and years of learning your craft on the county circuit for many years, learning the game, developing your skills as a fast bowler, and then you do the penultimate. You're called to the Test match side to make your debut, the 5th Test against the mighty West Indies in 1984. It's the pinnacle of obviously every cricketer's career to play Test cricket, but it must be nerve-wracking coming into a Test series against probably one of the greatest Test sides of all time in the West Indies. Incredible side.
Yeah, I mean, you never quibble with who you're playing when you've been called up to play for England, do you? But there might have been kinder debuts than the last match of the Blackwash series at the Oval, which was pretty tough. I mean, to be fair, the England players were just about shot, those who had played all that series against this incredible team. And I mean, again, so things change, and I didn't even know I was playing till the morning of the game. And head swimming, really. And I hadn't met half the team. I hadn't met Ian Botham before, who's obviously a very dominant character in that side. It was sort of set up camp in the middle of the dressing room, his clothes everywhere. And I felt out of my depth. And what they've done these days is so good in that, those on the fringe are brought into the England setup. They get an idea of what's going on. They know everybody. They know all the coaches. I mean, it wasn't a coach in those days. There was just sort of 3 selectors, and that was it. And the captain ran it all. But if you weren't in, and in those days it was a bit cliquey, I think. I mean, Ian had his sort of followers. He wasn't captain. David Gower was captain, but Ian still had this sort of group around him, which if you weren't in, you weren't really part of the setup, and I didn't know him from Adam, really. I mean, he's very good to me. He actually helped me get Viv Richards out, because Viv, it was a good game of cricket. I mean, until Desmond Haynes spoilt it by getting his only runs of the series, he got 100. We were actually halfway through the game about almost even, really. And we got them to 50 for 3 as well in the second innings, including I got Greenidge and I got Richards. And when Viv came out, Ian said to me, right, come on, let's have a plan here. You're not going to pitch a single ball up at him. It was a very quick pitch, actually. You're not going to pitch a single ball up at him, so I'll tell you. And so I bowled short at Viv, bouncer after bouncer, and he's swaying and ducking. He's on the back foot, what seemed quite a long time, maybe 3 or 4 overs, I guess. And then I got the message from Ian, I pitched one up, bang, he's on the back foot, LBW, thanks very much. Viv still says it wasn't out. So we still banter about that a bit. And I might have squeezed an umpire's call out of it these days. But it was an amazing experience. And funnily enough, I went back home, and it was in the very early days of video recorders. And I had at least managed to program this thing, which is like the size of a TARDIS with all buttons and stuff. But I remember watching back, they were only about half an hour long, the highlights in those days. I remember watching back, and I really couldn't remember the game. It was, the whole thing had sort of passed in a bit of a blur. My dad was in one of the stands in tears, all that sort of stuff. So it was very emotional. And then the next match was a bit of a disaster, because immediately we played Sri Lanka. It was their first test in England. So it was a very special occasion for them, but for our England team, who were just blown away by the West Indies, it was a disaster, really. And for some reason, it was a beautiful day, the first day at Lord's, not a cloud in the sky, and Gower put them in. And they were still batting Saturday morning. I mean, it was just a disaster. Ian was injured, Paul Allott got injured, people were just dropping out. I remember taking the third new ball. I got a couple of wickets, but yeah, it was a really awful game to be involved in, desperate. And so I didn't make the winter tour, or at least the start of the winter tour as a result. But you know, it's that feeling that you belong. And these days I look down and I have to be very honest and actually make very quick appraisals, and often too quick, about the expectation these days that, you know, is this bloke going to be good enough? Jonathan, you're often asked after one innings, you know, you try and be fair and kind. And you can tell immediately those who say, yeah, I mean, Ben Stokes, Sam Curran, you see people like that coming in, you go, absolutely. You know, you just tell that they just make that step up without any problem at all. But then you look at some of the others and you can see that actually it's going to be a bit of a struggle. And I was definitely in that group. And I knew when I was playing, if I didn't make an immediate hit, then I'd be out, because that's the way that it was. There was this real quick sort of revolving door process, which is very good for county cricket, because if you're playing county cricket and you knew, hey, if I get some wickets this week, I might play for England next, which was great. It was a great incentive to really run in county cricket. And county cricket in the 80s has never been stronger. And I don't care what Fred Truman would say to me. It just was, with the quality of overseas players, England players all playing. It was a really, really very competitive decade of county cricket. And there was this policy as well. So you knew that you could actually get in that England side next week. And there was a lot of young English fast bowlers around, all the same sort of quality. But the problem was, of course, that once you got picked for England in that situation, you knew if you didn't perform immediately, you'd be out, because of that incentive going on in county cricket. So it was a bit of a swings and roundabouts. It did make county cricket very strong, but I think it did make it, you know, you need more time to get to settle into an England side.
From your recollections, it sounds a very tough and competitive period. And you played a total of 3 test matches and 3 one-day internationals for England. When you kind of reminisce and you look back at those games and that period, are you proud of what you did, or do you kind of regret and wish you'd have done things differently? Or I suppose it's fate, I guess.
I mean, it's sad, because my statistics are horrible. You know, they're kind of the wrong way around. If I had a batting average of 92 and a bowling average of 11, then whatever it was, then I'd be all right. But you know, 3 one-off matches in reality, and the third one I played was an Ashes match at Old Trafford, which was very badly weather affected, and there was a gale blowing straight down the ground, which I had to bowl into when we were bowling, and it was a really, you know, not a great game, and I was dropped after that and didn't play again. So it's frustrating, because I know I might have been better, but then there's part of me that thinks, I'm not sure. I think probably, you know, I was a very successful county bowler, but there is that step up, and I'm not sure, you know, well, my performances would suggest that I wasn't good enough to make it up all the way up. So I can reflect very easily on it, because most people who listen to me on the radio, I don't think ever really have any idea that I even played, and I'm quite happy with that. I mean, I'm a much better broadcaster than I was a cricketer. So, you know, it's just one of those things that, you know, as a broadcaster, I feel it's much more of a natural thing, whereas a cricketer, it was hard work. You know, I mean, a lot of practice and a lot of, you know, all those things that you had to do in order to make the mark. Whereas, you know, broadcasting, I can just sit down, and as long as you're careful and you're fairly measured about what you do, and you keep taking occasional risk. But you know, it's a much more natural business for me, broadcasting, than playing cricket.
I wanted to bring up in the conversation, because it was a key achievement and significant, the 100 first-class wickets of the season for Leicestershire in 87. But then in 1990, you decide to end your cricket career during that season. Why ultimately did you decide to make that decision?
Yeah, well, there were two things really. One, I discovered radio, so I'd worked in Radio Leicester for those winters, which was a great opportunity. And as we talked earlier, I fell in love with radio, and I knew that I could do it. And so, in a way, it made me relax a bit about cricket because I knew I had an opportunity outside the game. So that was the first thing. The second was that in 1989, when England were losing the Ashes, the last test came. David, again, was captain, although clearly had no authority anymore. And they'd picked the team for the last test, and we were playing somebody at Grace Road. And the phone kept ringing in the dressing room, and it was fast bowlers to speak to David, dropping out through injury. And in the end, David, I remember, taking about the 6th or 7th call, just sat slumped in his chair in the dressing room. He was going to go down to the Oval. He hadn't got a team. And he said, I haven't got any bowlers. And Peter Willey said, well, what about Aggers? He's doing all right. He's having a decent season. And David looked at me. He said, yeah, of course. Yeah, right. Well, yeah, you're in. I said, what, you serious? He said, yep, that's it. You're in. You're playing against Australia at the Oval on Thursday. I thought, wow. He said, go back home, get your kit sorted out. And I'll just confirm it first thing in the morning. Oh, great. Okay, I went back home. I got full of sweaters out, my England cap, phoned my dad, say, Dad, I'm back in after all these years of trying. I've got there. Anyway, David phoned next morning and said, I'm very sorry, but you're not in anymore, because it was Ted Dexter and Mickey Stewart, who were the selectors, said that you're not in. So he said, who's this chap, Alan Eagleston? They've picked him instead. So that was that. So I knew I wasn't going to play for England again. To go back to your early question. So that's why I thought, because having played, you are always yearning to play again, and especially when you've had a bit of an unsatisfactory time, you know you can do better, or want at least the opportunity to show you could do better. I was a better bowler when I didn't play than I was when I did, actually, funnily enough. I sort of had two parts of my career. The first part when I tried to be a fast bowler, that's when I played for England, and the second half when I was a sort of canny swing bowler, still at a reasonable pace, but a different sort of bowler, and that was when I picked up most of my wickets. But that's when I didn't play. So I knew I wasn't going to play again, and so that was. And also a third aspect, I suppose, is that these jobs come up so rarely. And I was doing some work for the Today newspaper, colour newspaper at the time, and they gave me the chance to go to Australia in 1990 as their cricket correspondent and cover the series there. But they said, we'll only let you do it if you retire, basically. And that's fair enough. So because these jobs are so few and far between. I was the first professional cricketer to become a cricket correspondent. I mean, others have written, obviously, for newspapers, but to actually be a cricket correspondent and for a tabloid newspaper was quite a big step. And it was an opportunity that I simply couldn't turn down. So all those things together, that's why I jacked it in.
We're going to move on from the cricket career on the field to life in the commentary box as a broadcaster. But first of all, I wanted to share kind of something we have in common, which is a little bit silly, but 1991 is the period when you joined Test Match Special during the summer for the first time. Yep. That was the year I discovered cricket. I remember sitting in a hospital. A friend of my mum's was having her first child. And I remember the test series between the West Indies and England was on the television. And for the first time, I watched the cricket. I'd never seen it before. And it was obviously Malcolm Marshall. But the kind of thing that got me at the time was I was a big fan of Graeme Hick, who made his debut in 91. So I became a Graeme Hick follower for many years in the 90s, really as a result of that debut and all the, the whole country on his shoulders, the poor devil. But yeah, that particular series, was that the first one you commented on then as a commentator?
Yes, it was. And all the Graeme Hick thing, of course, because I'd played against Graeme quite a lot for Leicestershire. And word had just got out. I mean, he was prolific, absolutely prolific. But there was word around that he didn't play the short ball very well. I think Alan Donald had sort of put the wind up him somewhere, not surprisingly. But there was this talk. And so it's a long time ago now, but I'm pretty sure that I went to Worcester to watch Worcester play West Indies, which I would have done because that was always the starting off match. And Graeme got some runs in that, and they didn't really stick it up him. I was a bit surprised. He got some runs. And that really confirmed for the selectors that he had to play. because that was his first year, obviously, of registration, and when he actually became English, as it were. So he then appeared, obviously, playing, and they just bombed him, and he had a really miserable start. And again, we talk about that step up, and you can be very successful at one level, and not quite. And that's unkind, because Graeme was such a good player, and he did score runs for England. If he's got that 100 at Sydney when Mike Atherton declared, who knows what might have happened? Although I have to be honest, my sympathies were with Mike Atherton. I mean, he had a game to try and win, and Graeme knew. I mean, the messages going backwards and forwards, you could see them. Graeme knew he had to step on it. So I do rather side with Mike there, although Mike said in retrospect he'd wished he'd let him get his 100. But the team's got to come first. But anyway, that's all a bit waffly. But that was my first season on Test Match Special. So Brian Johnston, Fred Truman, Trevor Bailey, Bumble,
the best people to learn from.
Bill Frindle. Yeah, it was just incredible. Of course, it was the year of the leg over as well, which it's kind of set me up, really, I suppose, in that last Test match. Set me up as Brian Johnston's sort of sidekick, which was really good, because people on radio, we've talked about radio, but people don't like change very much on the radio. They get very used to voices, schedules. I think radio listeners are quite creatures of habit, and so when a new voice comes along on something like Test Match Special, there's a bit of time. Who is this? Who is this person? Is he or she going to be all right? They're going to cut their mustard, and so there is that bit of a period. And so the leg over, and for all the hilarity that it caused early in my broadcasting career on TMS, was actually a bit of a godsend. Although it was a bit tricky at the time, and I thought the program was going to drop off air, but it did establish Brian and I as a bit. And of course, Brian was so loved, and it's a wonderful radio broadcaster. And someone with whom we sort of shared a lot in common, really. I mean, he's like a granddad to me, really. There's 50 years difference, but he and I had the same silly sense of humour. A number of times his son Barry will phone me up even now and say, I heard you commentate today. That's exactly how Dad would have done it. We sort of I don't know, we sort of hit it off in a way, and he taught me so much without trying to. He didn't sit me down and say, this is what you should do, but just because we were on kind of the same wavelength, and I sat beside him, and I was one of the summarizers. I was with Fred and Trevor that summer. It seems ridiculous now, but that's how we did that first summer. It was the right thing to do, because I hadn't commentated on anything before. So my job really was to sit beside Brian, learn the timing, learn just the way that he would do it, when he was going to be serious, when he could try and have a bit of fun, all of those things. And then I commentated on the last Test match of that summer, which was Sri Lanka. So that was always my sort of route, if you like, the path I was going to take that summer. And it just taught me a lot. But I think, don't take this the wrong way, but I think that you do have to be able to do it. There aren't many people who I've worked with who are made. I think a cricket commentator, and it may be all sport, I'm not really sure, but certainly in my field, it's either something you can do or you can't, and you can make yourself much better. But I think you do have to have that basic instinct for doing it. It's not something you can teach very easily. It's something you can learn and from others, as long as you've got a sort of an aptitude for it. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's not open heart surgery. It's its own little thing. It's its own little skill. And as I said, I think you've got to inside you somehow to be able to do it. I really try and help everyone who I work with a lot. And there's no one really. I mean, Isha Guha has come a long way in a fairly short time. And I spent a lot of time working with Isha, and she's come on very quickly because she had that aptitude. You just got to have that basic ability, I think, to be able to do it.
You've spoken fondly about Brian Johnston and your relationship with him, but I want to talk about another key figure, your relationship with Christopher Martin Jenkins, who you succeeded as BBC cricket correspondent. But he's also a man that's gone on the record as saying that you're one of the most respected sports journalists in his opinion. Tell us a bit about your relationship with him. Is he been kind of a mentor in any way, or?
Yeah, and I mean, when he died, it was absolutely heartbreaking because he had so much still to give. But I mean, Chris again is sort of part of the process, because when I went to Australia in 1990, when that Today newspaper gave me the job as correspondent and didn't make me retire, but I chose to retire. I didn't really have much option. But Chris on that tour announced that he was leaving the BBC as correspondent to go and join the Daily Telegraph. So that is how this job opened up. Chris leaving the BBC opened the door and gave me the opportunity, after quite a lot of thought, because I didn't want to let Today down, really. I felt a bit of loyalty to them because they took a chance on me, but yeah, you're really not going to apply for the BBC job. And so it was thanks to Chris moving on that I was able to apply and have been there ever since. But Chris, you know, I spoke about how people don't like change. You know, Chris was just such a hard act to follow because he was so brilliant at what he did. And even for 2 or 3 years, even on sports desks, the sports presenter would say, over to the ground, and here's our correspondent, Christopher Martin Jenkins, just out of habit. You know, I say, oh, it's Jonathan Agnew, actually. But here I am. Just because it was, you know, he was just such a familiar figure at you know, being there, doing that job. But from Chris, I think what I say about what Chris gave to cricket was he always had that absolute sort of fans loyalty and love. And by that, I mean that these days, and I'm one, more and more former players are taking up these positions, which is great. And they bring a lot of knowledge and experience and insight and that sort of stuff to the game. But if you've been a player for 10, 15, 18, 20 years, it has been your job. Playing cricket has been your job. And so you do tend to be perhaps a little more cynical about the game. You yourself will have played the game to the very edges of how it should be played because you're a professional. And what Chris did was Chris never had that. And so Chris would write really important articles about parts of university cricket, about minor county cricket, about schools cricket, and stuff that sort of passes the old crusty pro by as not very important, you know. But Chris knew how important it was, and so we missed that. We missed that enormously because that, you know, Chris never lost his love of the whole business of cricket, from grassroots all the way up to the very top. I mean, he was a sort of, I guess that's almost literally, but you know, he loved the game and the players so much that you could almost imagine him having an autograph book in the back of his pocket. And when he'd interviewed someone, you know, he was just a lover of the game and a lover of the players. So you know, I miss Chris enormously because he was, you know, a massive influence on me. Whether he would like the changes that are going on at the moment, I very much doubt, and he'd probably find it quite frustrating. And so maybe from that perspective, maybe it's about he's watching from on high rather than having to get his hands dirty with all the changes that are going on. But you know, he was an amazing man, utterly forgetful, totally disorganized, and a lot of fun.
From the medium of radio, what was it like making the transition to working for Channel 4? And obviously you did that during the Cricket World Cup in 1999, and also working with the great Richie Benaud.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, it's actually on BBC because it was a bit complicated because BBC lost the rights that winter, summer, correction. They lost the rights to Test cricket to Channel 4, but we still had the World Cup to do. So all the commentators on BBC who were there, obviously, and I don't blame them, sort of jumped ship and went off to Channel 4 or Sky who were doing it. And so there was no one left, the BBC, to do the World Cup. And so I got a phone call from my boss saying, "Oh, I've got great news, Jonathan. You're going to be hosting the World Cup on BBC Telly." I said, "I'm not." I said, I'm a radio man. I can't do that. He said, "No, we'll send you for training. Don't worry." So they gave me 1 day's training with Peter Purvis from Blue Peter, who's a lovely chap, but not really a cricket man, down at Elstree Studios. And the one rock that I had was Richie, because Richie didn't go. I mean, Richie was quite canny and he held out. And of course, Channel 4 took him eventually. But for that period, he worked with me on the World Cup. So there was me and him in the studio. And again, it's sort of pinch yourself. But although I'd come across Richie, I've been working this job for 8 years or so. So I knew Richie a bit, but he's a very private character, Richie, very keeps himself to himself. Very, very helpful in a very quiet sort of a way. And my worry was about time, really, because I talked about the two disciplines of radio and telly, and the main difference between the two is that while you do have to talk to time and you have to hit pips or whatever it may be, or end of program signature tunes and so on, credits and stuff, on the radio, I've got a stopwatch in my hand, which I can just sit and look at and watch going around to the point which I've got to say goodbye. But on the telly, of course, it's an earpiece, and it's a metallic, horrible, robotic voice in your ear that counts down from 59. And when it gets to 0 and you're looking at a camera, you've got to say goodbye. And that's tough. That is really tough. That's why I really do respect my television presenters. And I knew I was going to find that difficult. And the first one I missed by only about, I don't know, a second perhaps, but it wouldn't have looked good. And Richie sat there beside me and he said, "It didn't go very well, Jonathan, did it?" And I said, "No." He said, and I'm worried about it, Richie. I said, we've got 6 weeks of this. He said, "Well, look," he said, "it's quite simple." He said, "How long do you need to say goodbye?" And I sort of counted up and I said, I don't know, 7 seconds. He said, well, fine. So tomorrow and from now on, when you hear the count starting in your ear, ask me a question and I'll stop at 8. I said, "Are you serious?" He said, yeah, stop at 8. So that's what we did the next day. I think we were at Birmingham or something, and Pakistan had won. So I said, "Well, there we are, Richie, tremendous performance there by Pakistan and Inzwam ul Haq, what a great innings." And Richie set off 59, 58. And at 80 stopped, and I said, "Well, thanks, Richie, that's great." And I looked at the camera and said, "So there we are, good win for Pakistan here today. They take 2 points. Tomorrow, Richie and I are off to Old Trafford to watch England against New Zealand. We're on air at 10:30. We'll see you then. Goodbye, 0. And I hit 0 for the whole 6 weeks. And the BBC thought I was great, but it's entirely due to Richie, who's just a great, great disciplinarian.
The magic number was 8. I'm going to ask you one final question now on your on broadcasting. You've experienced so many magical moments, so many in the commentary box over many, many years. What's your favorite moment or test series? And lastly, of all the people you've worked with in broadcasting, which one has inspired you the most? That is
that's interesting question. Well, I'm going to have to say, I mean, for the first answer has to be the Ben Stokes day at Headingley, because I will never see anything like that again in Test cricket. And I know the World Cup final was again incredible, ridiculous. And I was so lucky to be on for both. But because I love Test cricket, and because so much at stake. I mean, if England had lost that match, they lost the Ashes. It was just everything, and it was a beautiful day and a massive crowd. England had been rubbish in the Test match. And then this incredible innings, and with Jack Leach as well. You always need something else in there as well. This sort of almost unsung hero, and Jack, with 70 odd needed, goes out, scores 1 run, and the innings Stokes played was just incredible. Alistair Cook, when I was on with Alistair at the end, he said that's the greatest innings ever played by an Englishman. And I mean, it was. You'll never see an innings like that again. Shots that he was playing, the courage, just everything. It was so. I'll never forget that. And the fact I interviewed him afterwards, and his eyes were a bit sort of shot, really. And I got in the car and drove back, and I was still on cloud 9, and my phone went ding. I looked down, and it was his mum who'd messaged me from New Zealand, who'd been up all night saying, "Oh, I've got to talk to someone, So I phoned her up in Christchurch, and I chatted down the A1 with Ben's mum. And that was really nice. It sort of, made a nice circle, really. So, that's, I'll never beat that. Broadcasting's interesting because the great piece of advice that I was given was by Henry Blofeld, actually. On my first day, I bumped into him at Headingley all those years ago. And Henry said, whatever you do, he said, be yourself. Don't try and copy anybody. And it's right. It's absolutely the best advice you can give. So, whereas you might find influences from, I think, lots of commentators, I hope, but particularly Brian. I mean, I know if I hadn't worked with Brian Johnston, I know what broadcaster I would want to be, but I wouldn't have the guts to be it, really, because he sort of gave me the wings, really, because he was one who showed me that broadcasting the way that I want to broadcast can be done, and he was just so brilliant at it that I was able to have the confidence to try and copy him. And there are bits of what I do that are him, and there are bits of what I do that aren't. But I think of all the commentators I've worked with, they've all taught me something, whether they've realised it or not. And you've got to be slightly different with the person that you work with. So I'm slightly different with Phil Tufnell than I will be with Michael Vaughan, than I will be with Ebony Renfrew Brent, and I will be with you just are, because the character, and then Geoffrey Boycott, of course, that character beside you, in a way, rather influences how you are as a commentator. And sometimes you're fighting for the mic a bit. Other times, Tuffers is just so quick, so fast at a one-liner. He's so good at that, and sort of making you laugh. And they all bring something, and whichever one it is who pulls a chair out and sits beside, and you think, okay, I've got that person for the next 20 minutes or so. It's always a pleasure, because they're all so good.
We come to the final part of the interview, and this is one of my favourite parts. I always enjoy this segment of Your Take. Some quick final questions, 12 in total. It's kind of a quick fire
all right
questions.
I'll brace myself.
Things you like, things you don't like, that kind of thing. Question number 1, what's your favourite pastime?
Flying a light airplane. So I've got about 500 hours now, and that's the one time I'm going in tomorrow, but the one time when, because obviously it's quite a lot going on when you're flying an airplane, I've absolutely just got nothing else in my head, really. So I load the dogs up, and we go to Skegness, which is about a half-hour flight from Nottingham. Land there amongst all the caravans and the tents, everything. It's a lovely little field. 10-minute walk on the beach, and we go and walk on the beach for an hour and then fly back again.
Next one, your favourite film and why?
Oh, crikey.
I'd find this one tricky. I've got about 50.
Yeah. I'll tell you, okay, make me think on my feet here. I'm going to be really, people are going to go, oh, God, really? But my wife and I see every Christmas Love Actually, just because it just kind of feels the right thing to do. We both sob.
Your favourite novelist?
Now, I'm going to show myself being really ignorant here. I just don't read.
Yeah, I'm the same.
I don't read. My wife gets really frustrated about it. But I don't know, if I do read, then I'll read a book in a day. But for some reason, whether it was going back to school and sort of being force-fed books to do, I did English A-level, whether it was that, and
time's always an issue I find with reading.
I think if I'm honest, then that's what it is. I haven't really got time, or I've got other things that I would choose to do and sit and read. So I'm going to have to pass on that.
No problem. If you could have done a different profession, what would it have been?
Oh, I'd have been an airline pilot.
Who is your greatest inspiration in life?
Peter Lever, because without him in 1971, I doubt I'd be sitting here talking to you now. He just, he was the spark, really. Watching him bowl that day, that really got me into the game.
Everybody so far has chosen the same newspaper, so it'd be interested to see if we have a different choice. Do you read a newspaper? I think I know what the answer would be, and if so, which one?
Well, I do.
Okay.
But I've got to be honest, a number of newspapers and I have not had an easy relationship. And so I know from first-hand experience that utter nonsense that is printed in our newspapers, just stuff that is not true. But because the go-to person to read about cricket is Mike Atherton, I read others, so I take the Times, I take the Telegraph, and I skim through. There's one newspaper that I refuse to buy, so but I skim through other areas to keep an eye on what's going on in cricket. Really, I mean, I'm a real news junkie.
Yeah.
So BBC app, Sky News app, those things are going a lot on my phone. But yeah, that answers that one.
Next one, your favourite.
Was that the same one? Was that the same one as everyone said?
No, everyone said The Guardian so far.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. Everyone's chosen The Guardian. Yeah. What's your favourite food?
I love barbecuing food. So Emma was ill about 3 years ago, and I'd never cooked anything before. But because she was having chemo, I had to suddenly step up. So I've suddenly become, well, I'll say it myself, quite good on the barbecue. And so we've got 3 now, 3 different types of barbecues, because Matthew Hoggard, who lives up the road, he's actually opened a barbecue sort of store now at a garden centre, and he teaches people how to cook. So the Hogster and his family are regulars around here, and I bought a couple off him. And I love barbecuing. I'm not just talking about throwing sausages or burgers on a flame. I mean, you know, like proper, you know, indirect heats and green eggs and things. So I love doing that. But I mean, I love all food, really. I mean, cricketers put me off salad. That was every lunch the professional cricketer was salad, or so it seemed. But there's not much that I don't eat apart from liver, which I hate.
You can't say this. What's your favourite curse word and why?
Well, yes, okay. Well, one word did slip out into the public domain, although it obviously was sent privately to somebody 3 years ago when somebody made an outrageous accusation about me in a newspaper. So that's not one that I use very often, I hasten to add. Well, I mean, really, I try not to, because, I mean, so far, I'm touching wood frantically. I mean, I've not sworn on air, and that is something that is just desperate. So therefore, try not to swear generally. I mean, you know, Ian Chappell swears every other word in real life, and sure enough has sworn horribly 2 or 3 times on TV. Chris Martin Jenkins would go the other way and talk about fish cakes or Fotherington Thomas, and he was really angry about something because he wouldn't swear in case he might say something on air. So I don't think I've really got one.
Couple more left. Who's your favourite cultural icon?
Cultural icon. Well, the man who, I mean, I meet a lot of really interesting people and interview them. So I'm going to tie it into that in a way, because someone who's been a massive influence, I mean, if you're my age, someone who in all sorts of ways has just been ever present in my life and has been a real icon as well. And I interviewed him. It was one of the few that we had to record. I couldn't do him live. But I interviewed Elton John, and his love of cricket was something I wasn't expecting. I mean, I was interviewing him because of cricket, obviously, but I interviewed him on his piano stool. And yeah, he you know, if you're my age, again, he's just been there, you know, and in so many ways has been an icon. I suppose the most famous icon that I've interviewed is Nelson Mandela, who I interviewed very badly because he speaks so slowly, and I was under so much pressure of a whole clamour of journalists behind me, and I had him, but because he spoke so incredibly slowly, I was sort of diving in, because I knew if there's a pause, this lot would all come in. So I have got a photograph interviewing Nelson Mandela. So it's a bit of an interesting contrast, I suppose, Nelson Mandela and Elton John. But it was, Elton John was a full 40 minutes, and I really admire what in my life what he did. But then what Nelson Mandela did also can't be compared. And been to Robben Island and the cell where he was locked up for the best part of 30 years, and that whole business, you know, obviously going to South Africa a lot. and feeling it change, actually. You know, actually, you can actually see it change, and it definitely is changing, which is great, largely down to him. So I suppose you've got to put Mandela at number one, but I'm kind of stealing him a bit in that sort of interviewing context, because Elton John was kind of this bit of a childhood hero, really.
And the final three, what's your favourite place or holiday destination?
Okay, I'm going to stick my neck out there and say favourite cricketing place is Adelaide, because you just get everything there. I mean, it's just a wonderful city, beautiful ground, and I love South Australia, which I've been lucky enough to see a lot of, because a friend of mine there also flies light aeroplanes. He's a fire bomber, actually, in aircraft. So we've done a lot of flying around really remote parts of South Australia, and I love it. Holiday destination, though, would be Bequia in the Caribbean, which you can just see off St. Vincent, which of course had a horrible volcano eruption recently, but that was always Tony Cozier's go-to place. Tony was a Barbadian. And I've always wondered, why would a Barbadian, let's face it, Barbados is fantastic. Why would a Barbadian go on holiday to Bequia? Because they're a pretty proud lot, the Bajans. Why would he go to Bequia? So when Tony died, Emma and I went, and it's just the most beautiful, small, wonderful little island, and it's proper old school Caribbean in a way. The pace of life is so slow. And I called a taxi because I knew where Tony used to stay, so I called a cab and said, right, I want to go we're going around the island. It's going to take about 20 minutes. I said, first of all, I want you to take me to this particular address. And he looked at me and said, oh, okay. So he drove Emma and I to this house that actually didn't have anybody in it at the time, but it just overlooked the ocean and was a beautiful spot. And I could just imagine Tony sort of sitting on that veranda with a margarita, which he used to enjoy, just watching the sea. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. I said to the taxi driver, I said, that's amazing. He said, I know. He said, do you know that the great Tony Cozier, he used to come here on holiday? And I said, I know. So that's why I'm here, actually, paying a sort of pilgrimage. He said, well, I can tell you, he said, I'm the chairman of the local cricket club. So there's only one cricket club on Bequia. And so he took me to his cricket ground, and there were goats on it, and they were preparing the pitch. And so we've kept in touch ever since. And I'm supposed to have gone back to Bequia for the last 2 years and been cancelled. So I shall make it back there again one day. But it's a great undiscovered jewel.
Who is your favourite music artist, and what's your favourite album?
Oh, I kind of mentioned him, haven't I suppose?
Yeah, you did mention Elton John, didn't you?
Yeah, I just love all his stuff, really. I mean, I'm not a very adventurous musical listener. I mean, I love music, and I was a music scholar at school. I played the piano, and actually in lockdown, I've been learning the guitar. So I've now got guitars and 2 ukuleles hanging on the walls.
Funny enough, I've been doing the same thing. I taught.
Have you? How are you getting on?
Yeah, not too bad. Very basic, and I'm writing songs. I've written about 50 songs. Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, I have.
Well, that's a step up. How are you getting on with the F chord?
That I was learning that the other night. Very tricky with the fingers. Yeah,
a horrible thing. And I've got this thing called Dupuytren's contracture, where your fingers curl in, which has finished my piano playing, sadly. But it does help the guitar, because you can obviously, your fingers curl, so it does help. But I just have to stick with Elton John, because he was just my favourite. But I do love music, and it plays a big part. And when we were in our bubbles last summer, actually we got quite a decent band up, because Ali plays the guitar, I was playing the ukulele at the time, Charlie Dagnall played bass, Henry Moran played the guitar, Mark Butcher plays the guitar very well, proper musician. And so we used to get a few sessions going in the evenings when we were in our bubble. So, but I've progressed. If progressing is the right word, I don't know. I mean, I do love the ukulele, but I think I'll keep progressing with the guitar for now.
And the penultimate question, very hard question: how do you wish to be remembered?
Oh, quite simple. As someone who I hope helped others get into cricket, and I had a lovely example of that. It was in the Caribbean World Cup, which had been a pretty horrid tournament, actually. It dragged on for ages. There were no crowds, and it was sort of a sanitized World Cup in the early 2000s. But we were doing highlights every day on BBC Two, and they were really quite hairy because they were live. And so it was sort of evening time, Caribbean, night time here. And we'd literally have to leave the ground sometimes a bit early, go to a location, and then do a live highlights show. And it had never been done before from West Indies like that. And we got as far as the final, and I walked out of the final, which had been a shambles. And I was going across the road to where we were going to do our highlights show, our last one. And I was a bit fired up anyway. It was a horrible end to the horrible tournament. And this lovely young woman came up to me and she said, "Oh, Agus," she said, "I'm so glad I've seen you. I'm here because of your programs." She'd been watching the highlights programs. We had some lovely locations. And she'd been watching back at home. I thought, I've got to go. And that's, that for me is what it's all about. There are serious sides to cricket. Of course there are. Part of my job as correspondent is to talk about those. But all I want to do as a commentator and as the presenter of TMS is to get people involved in the game, to think that it's to become aware of this great sport and to enjoy it and to pass that on. And that'll do me.
Thank you kindly. Nice way to end. The end of the over. The ball, the mascot.
A red ball, not a white ball.
Yeah, it has to be, doesn't it? Thank you kindly for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Pleasure.
I really enjoyed listening to you. And my final thing was, I live in a place called Long Ashton. It's in Bristol. We're fairly close to the centre of Bristol. We have a cricket side called the Occasionals. We're mainly dads that play a 20-over game on a Friday. I've been bad. I've hardly played any games at all. But we lost most of our tour games, and we could do with a bit of inspiration. There's a lot of batting collapses. What would be your advice to us Occasionals?
But I was a hopeless batsman. You don't want any advice from me. It always makes me laugh when Phil Tufnell talks about batting. Although, funnily enough, if we were put into a club cricket situation, we'd probably be okay. We'd probably score some runs. But does it matter if you keep losing? Is it frustrating that you keep losing? You're just enjoying it. You're enjoying the playing, and dads, you say, playing with your sons.
I think we enjoy it, and we enjoy a drop of the old Somerset cider as well.
And I think that's all that you need to be done. And it goes back to my previous answer, really. It's just there's nothing better, and I didn't have the opportunity, but nothing better than dad playing with a son. I know that a lot of people of my generation, or just a bit younger than me now, they're actually doing that. And that's really nice. I just enjoy it, for goodness sake.
Indeed, lovely note to end on. Thanks a lot. I've really enjoyed it, and all the best with the games in the summer. And I definitely will be listening to your Dorset tones on the radio. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Pleasure.